So for our last part with the trigonometry topic, we actually need to discuss how to measure in radians and what radians are. And so the first thing to remember is that radians are sort of equal to degrees in a way, that both measure the size of an angle. So it's similar to something like, meters and feet or grams and pounds. So radians and degrees are both ways with which we can measure angles. Now 1 radian is the angle formed at the center of the circle when the arc length is equal to the radius. And so that's the convention for which we define a radian. And the important thing for us will be actually converting between radians and degrees. And there's a few key ones to remember that I'll just go through quickly, but you'll be able to do this all in your calculator as well. So if we call that 0 degrees, moving up the circle we get 90 degrees. This would be 180 degrees. This would be 270 degrees. And this would take us back to 360 degrees. Now in radians, talking about it with blue here, that would be 0 radians. This would be pi divided by 2 radians. This would be pi radians. This would be 3 pi divided by 2 radians, and this would be 2 pi. So that's how you kind of see it as an equivalent. The 180 degrees is half a circle, and pi radians is also an angle that equals half the circle. So in a way we can rewrite these things out and say that 90 degrees is equal to pi divided by 2. 45 degrees would be equal to pi divided by 4, because that's a quarter of the way through if we put it in right there. 60 degrees is a third of the half circle, a third of 180, so that's pi over 3. And 30 degrees is a sixth of 180, so pi over 6 is going to be equal to 30 degrees. And how we can make the conversions here within our calculators is actually to just multiply by these things. So if you're going from degrees to radians, you'll multiply by pi over 180. I'll show you how to do that on the calculator in a second. And the other way around, if you're going from radians to degrees, you'll multiply by 180 over pi. And so both these cases you'll multiply, but you have to be careful about which is on top, the 180 or the pi. So first thing to notice in our calculators will be wanting to make sure we can actually calculate with pi. So if we just go into our run menu, here we can do some conversions. So looking at converting 70 degrees to radians, we would say 70, and then we would times by shift pi, which is there, so you have to use the shift key and pi, divided by 180. And you get 1.22. So writing that out here, we would go times pi over 180, and that is equal to 1.22 radians. You could equally write it out if you prefer to use the fraction key, 70 times 70 times shift pi over 180. That's another way to write it out, which would be just fine. So looking at these other ones, again going 140 degrees, we would times by pi over 180. And this one we will get 2.44 radians, which you can write as rad. 38 would be times pi over 180. And that comes out to being 0.6 rad. And now going the opposite direction, going from radians to degrees, we need to go the other way. So you need to think about timesing by the flip of that. So here it's going to be 180 over pi, and that's equal to 57.29 degrees. A half radian, if we times it by 180 over pi, we will get 28.65 degrees. And 2.3 radians, if we times by 180 over pi, we will get to 131.7 degrees. Now, double check, make sure you can actually plug these correctly into your calculator and get the answers. So don't just copy down what I've done, but go through the process of actually calculating it. So the next thing that we're going to look at then is how to set up our calculator so that we can calculate in degrees or we can calculate in radians. So let me just go through that one really quickly. If you're in here, where it actually matters for us, where it's important, is if we're going to use sin, cos, or tan. So for most of these problems, you'll be in degrees. For everything that we've done so far, though, using the sine rule or the cosine rule, you'll use degrees. But if you have to use some of these rules we're going to talk about, you'll need to switch to radians. So you'll notice, sorry, let me back up one. I'm in my main menu. I go to my run screen, and I need to use Shift Setup to hit the Setup button there. And if I look down here, I'll see Angle, and I'll notice here that it says radians. So currently, I am in radians. If I want to go to degrees, I would hit degrees and enter. And just to test this out, let's say sin of 65 is equal to, well, here it's telling me 0.9. So if we go and double check that, we can change the format that we're in. Here I'm going to change to radians. And we'll try that again. I get a different number. Sin of 65 is equal to 82. And if I do it again with degrees, so going back again, Shift Setup, oops, in the menu, Shift Setup, go back and try again with degrees, and do sin 65, I get a slightly different number. So that's why it's important to know when you need to be in degrees or when to be in radians, because you'll get a different number depending on how your calculator is set up. So for most things we would use degrees, but there'll be a few instances where we actually will use radians as well. And we'll take a look at those in the next video.